What if the world's most eccentric billionaire decided to do something so unexpected that it left everyone in shock? The question hung in the air like a challenge, a taunting proposition whispered to anyone within earshot. It wasn't just any regular night, it was the kind of evening that promised the unexpected, especially when the guest of honor was none other than Elon Musk, the man who had reshaped the future with SpaceX, Tesla, and his numerous ventures. But no one in the room could have predicted what was about to happen. It was a lavish dinner party held at one of Elon Musk's private properties, tucked away in a secluded part of the world, where the crème de la crème of society gathered, investors, celebrities, high-ranking tech executives, and a select group of people who, in some way or another, had crossed paths with Elon. The event was a celebration of another milestone in Musk's ever-growing empire. The evening was set to be one of polished elegance. Champagne, fine food, and intellectual conversations about the future of humanity and space exploration. Elon Musk, the man who had sent rockets into space and made electric cars a household name, was known for his sharp wit, eccentricity, and unfiltered opinions. He didn't care much for pretense or maintaining a facade, his presence was often a whirlwind of unpredictable energy. But tonight, something was different. There was a noticeable tension in the air, a subtle undercurrent that something extraordinary, or rather, something totally out of character, was about to unfold. The guests were scattered around the room, engaging in hushed conversations. A few stood by the bar, exchanging laughs and discussing the latest headlines, while others were deeply immersed in intellectual debates about Elon's latest project. His ventures were always the center of attention, and tonight was no different. A few people exchanged playful jabs about his ambitious ideas. Colonizing Mars, the Hyperloop, AI-controlled vehicles. All the things that had made Musk a household name. But as the evening wore on, it became apparent that not everyone in the room saw Elon the way the public did. Some of the chatter turned to more pointed criticisms, with a few guests questioning the practicality of his endeavors. Elon's dreams are just that, dreams, one guest remarked, half joking, half serious. Is he trying to save the world, or just build a personal empire? Elon, who had been silently listening from across the room, his trademark half-smile ever present, stood up. A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned toward him. People anticipated another round of tech talk, another bold statement about the future of humanity. But instead, Elon raised his hand slightly as if signaling for attention. All right, you've heard me talk about rockets, and you've heard me talk about electric cars, he said, his voice cutting through the chatter. But tonight, I'm going to do something a little different. A ripple of surprise ran through the crowd, and some of the more familiar faces exchanged amused glances, as if to say, what now? Elon smiled, clearly enjoying the suspense. I'm going to sing. A brief pause followed. Some guests chuckled, thinking it was just another of Musk's quirks, his way of keeping things interesting. After all, he was known for his odd humor, like the time he smoked marijuana on a podcast or joked about putting a Tesla in orbit around Mars. But as Elon took a few confident steps toward the stage, the laughter slowly faded. It was almost as if everyone collectively held their breath. They had never seen this side of him, vulnerable, maybe, or at least willing to entertain something out of the ordinary for the sake of entertainment. Musk wasn't known for being a showman in that sense. He was an innovator, a disruptor, not a performer. And yet, here he was, preparing to do something that seemed entirely out of place for someone with his stature. Let's make this interesting, Elon quipped, a glint of mischief in his eyes. The mic in his hand seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the moment itself was a prelude to something far greater than anyone could imagine. Elon, you can't be serious, someone in the back called out, laughing nervously. Are you really going to sing? But Elon didn't respond. Instead, he placed the microphone to his lips, his fingers brushing across the stand as if preparing to reveal some hidden talent. The room went silent. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze in place. The clinking of glasses stopped, the idle chatter faded, and the conversations from moments earlier evaporated. It was as though time had slowed, and all eyes were now riveted on the eccentric billionaire. And then, Elon Musk sang. It wasn't what anyone had expected. In fact, it was the opposite of what anyone had imagined. The first few notes were gentle, almost tentative, but there was an undeniable depth to his voice. It was soulful, raw, and filled with emotion. This wasn't some half-hearted joke or a quick, off-the-cuff attempt to entertain a room full of billionaires. No, this was something entirely different, something authentic. He sang a song that wasn't flashy or showy, but it spoke to something much deeper, something more human. A song about struggles, about finding purpose in chaos, about the relentless pursuit of dreams that often led to failure but still pushed you forward. As the lyrics unfolded, there was no mistaking it, Elon Musk was pouring his heart into every note. Guests exchanged looks, unsure of what they were witnessing. Some looked bewildered, others seemed to hold their breath, not knowing how to react. For those who had seen Musk as merely a businessman, a tech mogul with a head full of grand ideas, this was a revelation. The man who had made headlines for being brash, for challenging norms, was now standing before them, vulnerable and human. A few moments passed, and the room was quiet. No one moved, no one dared to interrupt the fragile moment. Elon sang with a conviction that could not be ignored. He was no longer just the face of Tesla or SpaceX, he was, for the first time, someone who was sharing a piece of himself that no one had seen before. When the song ended, the silence was deafening. It was as if the entire room was in a collective state of disbelief. The laughter that had filled the air moments earlier was gone. The guests, many of whom had once seen Elon as nothing more than a visionary businessman, now saw him as something more, a person who, despite his grandiose ambitions, could still touch something deeper within them. The tension in the room had shifted, but it wasn't just because of Elon's performance. It was because they had witnessed something rare, vulnerability in a person who, for all his achievements, had never really shown the world who he truly was. The room remained quiet for what seemed like an eternity before someone finally spoke. A soft murmur began to ripple through the crowd, the realization dawning on everyone, they had just witnessed a side of Elon Musk that none of them had expected. And just like that, the evening would never be the same again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk's story was never meant to be one of simplicity. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, he was a child who seemed destined to feel out of place in the world around him. From an early age, Elon was driven by a desire to understand how things worked, a curiosity that often found him lost in books or tinkering with anything that could be taken apart and put back together. His mind was always 3 steps ahead of the world he inhabited. But this restless intellect would often make him feel isolated, as if no one quite understood the way he saw the world. Growing up in a house with a father who was emotionally distant and a mother who was constantly juggling work and raising her children, Elon's early life wasn't easy. His parents divorced when he was young, and he moved between his mother in Canada and his father in South Africa. Elon later described his father as being emotionally abusive, a relationship that left him with a sense of alienation. He wasn't exactly popular in school, and his classmates made fun of him for being awkward and different. He was bullied relentlessly, especially for his tendency to lose himself in books or his obsessions with the sciences and technology. Despite this, he never let the taunts affect him for long. If anything, it seemed to push him further into his shell. Elon retreated into the world of his imagination and began constructing dreams of his own, dreams that didn't belong to the normal world. At 12, Elon had already taught himself computer programming, and it was then that he created his first computer game, Blaster, a space adventure that he sold for $500. While this was a small achievement, it was a defining one. It signaled the beginning of his journey into the tech world. It was a victory, yes, but it also pointed to a much bigger desire to create something that could change the world. For young Elon, this was merely the first step. His vision wasn't limited to coding games, it was about building an empire of ideas, a future that only he could see. His move to Canada with his mother in the mid-90s marked a turning point. Elon attended Queen's University for 2 years, and from there, he made the jump to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. Musk had already formulated big ideas about the world, ones that many people believed were too far-fetched or downright impossible. But Elon was not one to shy away from challenging the status quo. He was relentless in his pursuit of knowledge and success. At Penn, he studied physics and economics, absorbing everything he could about how the world worked and how he could make it better. But it was never just about making money, it was about making a difference. That was Elon's drive. He didn't want to just get rich, he wanted to change the way humanity lived and thought. After graduating, he briefly attended Stanford to pursue a PhD, but his time there was short-lived. In the mid-90s, the internet boom was underway, and Elon saw an opportunity to build something that could revolutionize industries. He left Stanford and launched his first company, Zip2, a software that provided maps and business directories for newspapers. His decision to drop out of Stanford wasn't a popular one with his family, but Musk was unwavering. "I didn't want to do what other people were doing," he said later. "I wanted to make a difference." Zip2 eventually sold to Compaq for nearly $300 million, and Musk used the proceeds to fund his next venture, X.com, which would later become PayPal. PayPal's success in transforming online payments made Musk a wealthy man, but his drive wasn't motivated by money. Every dollar he earned went into building bigger dreams. The world of finance and business was just a stepping stone for Musk. He wasn't interested in accumulating wealth for the sake of wealth, he was after something far grander. Through it all, Musk struggled with a sense of not quite fitting in. Even though he was a wealthy tech mogul, the outside world often viewed him as an eccentric genius, an outsider. His intense focus on his ventures, combined with his abrasive personality and straightforwardness, made it hard for many to understand him. His relationships, particularly with family, friends, and even lovers, were often strained. His marriages were short-lived. His first marriage to Justine Wilson ended after 8 years, and his second to actress Tallulah Riley ended after a few tumultuous years as well. Despite his success, he had always seemed to carry an underlying loneliness, a feeling of isolation that even his fortune and fame couldn't fully fill. Yet, despite these personal challenges, Musk's vision never wavered. His ambitions were monumental: to colonize Mars, to revolutionize the automobile industry, to create sustainable energy solutions. And it wasn't just talk. Every idea, every business decision Musk made was a step towards reshaping the world in his own image. His ultimate goal, to ensure that humanity was not reliant on a single planet, was a vision so bold that many in the tech and business communities called him a dreamer. But for Musk, these dreams were not impractical. They were the very essence of who he was. His mind never stopped moving forward. With each new challenge, he dug deeper into his obsession with space exploration and electric vehicles. He wasn't just trying to change the world, he wanted to push humanity into the future. For him, failure was not an option, it was a learning process. It was only when SpaceX and Tesla began making real progress that the world started to take notice. While both companies faced numerous setbacks, rockets exploding and electric vehicles failing to meet demand, Musk's determination and single-mindedness never faltered. He publicly acknowledged his mistakes and failures, but he was always looking ahead. Failure was something he had become accustomed to, and he was unapologetically relentless in his pursuit of the impossible. But none of this would have prepared anyone for what happened at the dinner party that night. No one would have expected that the man who had changed the world with rockets and electric cars would stand up in front of a room full of high-profile individuals and sing. Yet that was exactly what happened. What had driven Elon to take such an unexpected step? Why, in the midst of a celebration of his many triumphs, would he choose to expose such a raw, vulnerable part of himself? Was it an attempt to show a side of himself that the world had never seen before? Perhaps it was his way of reminding everyone that behind the visionary and the billionaire was a man, someone who, just like the rest of them, carried his own struggles and insecurities. Whatever the reason, it was clear that this night would go down in history as one of the most unexpected moments of Elon Musk's career. It would challenge the way the world viewed him, not just as a businessman, but as a human being. The man who had dreamed of reaching the stars had just revealed his own, deeply human side. The room was still reverberating from the unexpected moment. Elon Musk, the enigmatic genius whose mind was synonymous with innovation and future-shaping technologies, had just done something no one in that room had ever imagined. He had sung. And as the last note of his impromptu performance lingered in the air, everyone was left grappling with a single, unsettling question: what now? The tension in the room shifted, and the casual conversations that had once filled the space came to an abrupt halt. The atmosphere, previously filled with admiration and awe for Musk's success, suddenly felt fractured. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Some laughed nervously, trying to brush off the shock of the moment, while others remained silent, too stunned to say anything. Elon set the microphone back on its stand and turned toward the audience, his eyes scanning the room. He looked unbothered, even amused by the stillness. But beneath that composed exterior, a quiet unease simmered inside him. It wasn't just about the performance, it was about something deeper that had surfaced. He had spent most of his life building his public persona around innovation, space exploration, and cutting-edge technology. The world knew him as a relentless visionary, a man who was obsessed with the future and who made impossible ideas a reality. Yet, in that moment, standing on stage in front of the most powerful and influential people he knew, he had exposed a side of himself that many would never have expected. A side that was vulnerable, human, and imperfect. Some of the guests in the room couldn't quite process it. Elon had built a reputation of being larger than life, untouchable, unflinching. The man who had sent a car into space and revolutionized the way we thought about electric vehicles was suddenly showing a side of himself that was unfamiliar, even unsettling. Whispers started to fill the room. A few voices, no louder than murmurs, questioned his sanity. Was that a publicity stunt? One person asked, though their voice faltered. Is he trying to stay relevant? Or is he just going through a phase? Another guest, who had been a long-time associate of Musk, shook their head in disbelief. That wasn't just a joke. That was real, too real. Elon could hear the undercurrents of judgment flowing around him. He could feel the weight of their eyes, the mix of confusion and skepticism. He had expected some reaction, perhaps laughter, perhaps applause. But this was different. The crowd wasn't sure how to react, and in that uncertainty, an unsettling truth was beginning to settle in. The truth was, the people in that room didn't know how to view him anymore. Was Elon Musk still the brilliant, groundbreaking entrepreneur they had admired, or was he just another eccentric billionaire caught up in the superficiality of fame? In that single moment, all of his accomplishments, the achievements that had made him a household name, felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. And while some guests struggled to reconcile the man they had always known with the one who had just bared his soul through song, there was another group in the room that felt something else entirely. The critics. The ones who had never quite bought into Musk's lofty ideals or his future-focused mission. To them, this moment wasn't a revelation. It was validation. See, one critic whispered, a sharp edge in their tone. It was only a matter of time before he cracked. A guy like that can't be normal. You can't spend all your time working on space rockets and electric cars and not lose touch with reality. The words felt like daggers, and Elon couldn't help but feel their sting. For the first time in years, the man who had never been afraid to challenge the world and its expectations felt a seed of doubt take root in his mind. Was he really losing touch with reality? Could it be that his relentless pursuit of innovation had distanced him from his humanity? The pressure of constantly being ahead of the curve, of always being the one to push boundaries, had been mounting for years. And now, in a single act of vulnerability, he had exposed that pressure to the world. The weight of his own thoughts became a burden that Elon couldn't shake. He had never been one to second-guess himself. But tonight, he couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his chest. Was it possible that, by showing his vulnerability, he had alienated the very people who had admired him? Had he made a fatal mistake by stepping outside the carefully crafted image of the unshakable genius? For the rest of the evening, Elon kept to himself, retreating to a quieter corner of the property. He tried to distract himself with the passing moments, but every sound in the room, every movement, felt like it was reminding him of the awkwardness he had created. His mind began to spiral. The more he thought about it, the more the weight of that single performance seemed to loom over him. But as the night went on, something unexpected happened. The people who had once been skeptical began to shift. A few guests, noticing Elon's discomfort, decided to take a different approach. Rather than viewing the performance as a weakness or a sign of instability, they started to see it as a display of authenticity. In a world where billionaires were often seen as aloof and disconnected from the rest of society, Elon had given them a glimpse into the person behind the persona. "I think he just showed us something real," one of the guests said, leaning toward their companion. Most people would have crumbled under the pressure. He just let it all out. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a subtle shift began to take place. The mood in the room lightened, and conversations that had felt strained and forced now flowed more freely. Elon, despite his earlier self-doubt, couldn't help but overhear the change. There were no grand gestures, no applause, but the tone in the air was different. It was as if the people in the room had finally seen him for who he truly was, not just the business mogul, not just the visionary, but a human being who had moments of fragility and uncertainty, just like everyone else. In that instant, Elon realized something important. The world might judge him for the things he did, but there would always be a small group of people who saw past the headlines and understood the deeper layers of his journey. Those were the people who mattered. They were the ones who had witnessed his humanity. But that didn't change the fact that, in the wake of his performance, Elon had unwittingly created a rift. The critics would continue to question him, and the world would always be quick to label him, whether as a genius, a madman, or something in between. The tension was only beginning to rise. The days following the dinner were filled with an almost palpable silence. The media, ever hungry for drama, had picked up on the unusual moment and were buzzing with questions. But they weren't questioning Elon's ideas or his businesses. They were questioning him. Was this the beginning of the end? Had the great Elon Musk cracked under the pressure? Headlines ran wild: Elon Musk sings at party, is he losing it, has Musk's genius finally hit a wall? The voices of doubt and skepticism were louder than ever. It seemed like every corner of the internet had an opinion on the subject, and in the midst of it all, Elon's name was being dissected, analyzed, and reduced to the act of one impromptu song. But as the world turned its gaze upon him, something else was brewing within Elon. The doubt that had plagued him after the dinner started to fade, replaced by an unfamiliar yet unmistakable feeling. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. What he was feeling now was freedom. It was as if, in that moment of vulnerability, he had shed a layer of armor he didn't even realize he'd been wearing. The truth was, he had become so consumed by the expectation to be something greater, something untouchable, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be just him. He had always been a forward-thinking visionary, someone who saw the future as a playground for his wildest dreams. But now, he needed to stop running from his humanity and confront the parts of himself he had spent so long hiding. In a sense, that night at the dinner had sparked a journey. A journey not to Mars, not to the future of electric cars, but to a deeper understanding of himself. Elon knew that his public image was already larger than life, and the public's obsession with him meant that every move he made would be scrutinized. But the idea of retreating into the shadows wasn't an option anymore. It was time to face this unexpected new chapter with the same determination that had led him to take on some of the most ambitious projects in history. So, in the weeks that followed, Elon began to do something unexpected. He started embracing the idea of imperfection. He'd been so focused on creating something flawless, so relentless in his pursuit of perfection, that he hadn't allowed room for growth in the way he viewed himself. What if imperfection wasn't a weakness but a strength? What if, by exposing his vulnerability, he could connect with people on a deeper level and inspire them to be as audacious as he had been when he first dreamed of reaching the stars? Elon had never been one for conventional paths, so why start now? One afternoon, he invited a few close friends and colleagues to his SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. As they gathered in a room overlooking the busy launch site, Elon stood at the front of the room with a confident yet oddly vulnerable demeanor. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," he started, looking around the room at the familiar faces. "About the song. About the way the world reacted. And about how I've spent so much of my life hiding the parts of me that don't fit into the Elon Musk persona that the world has built around me." There was an air of tension in the room, as if everyone was bracing themselves for some grand declaration of change. They knew Musk wasn't the type to make idle speeches. Whatever he was about to say would be a new chapter for him, a pivot, perhaps, in how he was seen by the world. "I'm not going to try and explain it away," Elon continued, his voice steady but raw. "Yes, I sang. Yes, I might have made people uncomfortable. But honestly, I'm done apologizing for being real. I've spent too much of my life in my head, trying to make the impossible happen, and in the process, I've lost sight of something. The thing that makes all of this worth it, human connection." The room grew silent. This wasn't the Elon they were used to, the CEO of Tesla, the founder of SpaceX, the billionaire visionary who lived his life in pursuit of bold goals. This was something different. This was the Elon who had let his guard down. For the first time, they saw the cracks in his armor, and they could feel his honesty radiating through every word. "I'm not going to be perfect," he went on. "I'm going to fail. I'm going to make mistakes. But the one thing I've learned in all my ventures is that failure is not the end, it's just part of the process. If I'm going to keep pushing for the future of humanity, if I'm going to push for things like space travel and sustainable energy, I need to be authentic. I need to be real about the journey, not just the destination." There was a pause before one of his colleagues, a longtime friend from Tesla, spoke up. "Elon, honestly, that's brave. You know, we've always known you to be someone who doesn't shy away from risk, but this is something different. You're showing us a side of you that's rarely seen. And I think it's something people can connect with." Another friend nodded in agreement. "We all know you're more than just the next big idea. You're human." The conversation continued from there, shifting from awkward silence to open, candid dialogue. Elon shared his thoughts on the pressure of always being at the forefront, the weight of expectations that had built up around him, and the personal cost that came with being seen as a larger-than-life figure. It was therapeutic for him. A revelation. And as they discussed the future, his future, their future, something within Elon began to solidify. He didn't have to be perfect. He didn't have to be the flawless genius the world thought he was. He didn't have to apologize for being human. But what would this new perspective mean for the next stage of his ventures? The journey ahead would be far from predictable. As Elon and his team brainstormed ideas for the next phase of SpaceX's mission to Mars, Tesla's electric revolution, and even his plans to fight climate change, one thing became clear: this shift in mindset could become the cornerstone of a new era for both Elon Musk and the companies he had built. The coming months would test him in ways he hadn't yet anticipated, but as always, Elon Musk was prepared to face the unknown. Elon Musk wasn't one for waiting. By the time the week had passed since his introspective meeting at SpaceX, a sense of urgency had settled in him. It wasn't just about his companies, or even the groundbreaking projects he had undertaken, it was about him, about how he would continue to evolve. Could he truly embrace his vulnerability and still lead as the visionary he was known to be? Could he maintain the balance between authenticity and leadership? As the days wore on, the pressure of these existential questions continued to gnaw at him. The world was already turning its eye back on him, and as much as he had tried to remain unaffected by the media frenzy after the dinner, something inside him had shifted. The critics were still out there, and their words stung with an unexpected intensity. He wasn't sure why it hurt so much, but the doubts that lingered in the corners of his mind felt almost suffocating. One evening, as he sat alone in his office at Tesla's headquarters, the weight of the world seemed unbearable. He had built a legacy, yes, but was it the right legacy? He had done so much for the future of humanity, electric vehicles, space exploration, but in trying to push the boundaries of what was possible, had he lost sight of what was important? Could the personal sacrifices he'd made, the time lost with his family, the missed moments, ever be redeemed? A knock on the door pulled him from his spiraling thoughts. He glanced up, startled for a moment, but then smiled faintly as his assistant entered the room, her presence always a grounding force in his chaotic life. "Mr. Musk, you have a call," she said, her tone neutral yet respectful. "It's from a personal contact, someone you've worked with for years. I think you should take it." Elon nodded and gestured for her to put the call through. As he pressed the button on his desk, the familiar voice of one of his closest friends, Rachel, crackled through the speaker. "Elon," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "I've been hearing the rumors, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The world is watching you, and they're still talking about that performance. You know that, right?" He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, I know. I don't care about what they think. But there's something different this time. It feels different. Like I've crossed some line I didn't know existed." There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if Rachel was carefully considering her words. "What you did, it wasn't a mistake, Elon. You showed something real. People can see the cracks now, but you have to own it. This is where it gets interesting. They've been expecting perfection from you for so long, but the truth is, no one is perfect. Not even you." Elon was silent, unsure how to respond. He didn't need Rachel's validation, he was still grappling with what he had learned about himself in the past few days. But something about her words, the simplicity of them, struck a chord deep within him. "You're right," he muttered finally. "I've spent so long pretending I have it all figured out. But I don't. And I guess it's time to admit that." Rachel's tone softened. "That's why I'm calling, Elon. This is a turning point, but not in the way the world thinks. They're waiting for you to collapse, to fall from grace. But they don't know what's coming next." He smiled slightly, a spark of something, a mixture of defiance and curiosity, flickering inside him. "What are you talking about? You've always been about the future, right? But you've been so focused on the big picture that you forgot about the journey. This vulnerability, it's part of the story. If you can bring people into your world, show them that you're not invincible, they'll understand the real why behind what you do. They'll root for you. Not just the genius, but the man." Elon sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. It wasn't that he had found all the answers, it was that, for the first time, he felt he could stop running. He didn't need to hide behind his achievements or his image. He could share his struggles, his doubts, and still lead, perhaps even more powerfully than before. Just as he was about to respond, his assistant entered the room again, holding up a piece of paper. "Elon, the team's ready for your input on the Mars timeline, but I also need to let you know, the press conference is scheduled for tomorrow." A heavy silence fell over him again. The press conference. The moment where he would have to face the world once more, on his terms. But now, it wasn't just about discussing the next technological breakthrough. It wasn't just about delivering some new grand plan. It was about confronting his own journey and sharing it with the world. He couldn't hide anymore. The vulnerability he had exposed to his closest colleagues had begun to evolve into something more. "Okay," he said, his voice quieter but resolute. "We'll do it. I'll be there tomorrow." The next day, the press conference was held in a large auditorium at Tesla's headquarters, filled with reporters, investors, and industry insiders. The tension in the room was palpable. Musk had a reputation for being unpredictable. No one knew what to expect from him, least of all himself. As he stood at the podium, preparing to speak, a sudden wave of clarity washed over him. This wasn't just a corporate presentation. This was his moment to redefine himself. His vulnerability, his humanity, could be his strength, and the world would witness it firsthand. He opened the press conference with a simple statement: "I'm not here to talk about Tesla or SpaceX or Mars today. I'm here to talk about something more important, the real reason why I do what I do." The room went silent, the reporters unsure of what would follow. For years, I've been consumed by the idea of building a better future. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of the fact that the future isn't just about technology or space exploration. It's about people, about making their lives better and making sure we don't lose what makes us human along the way. I'm not perfect. And I've made mistakes. But I want to be real with all of you. The room was still. Elon could feel the weight of every eye in the auditorium. But this time, it didn't feel like judgment. It felt like curiosity. "I believe in the future, but I also believe in the power of showing up as who we are, flaws and all," Elon continued, his voice steady and clear. "I'm committed to pushing the boundaries of what's possible. But I'm also committed to doing it in a way that stays true to who I am." There was a long pause, and then, slowly, a few reporters began to nod. For the first time, the focus wasn't on Musk's genius. It wasn't on his inventions. It was on him, the man behind the innovations. And as the room sat in quiet contemplation, a sense of something profound shifted. Elon Musk was no longer just a figure to admire from afar. He was someone real, someone people could relate to. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The press conference marked a turning point. Elon Musk had stepped away from the pedestal he had once carefully crafted for himself. He had exposed the cracks in his armor, but rather than crumbling under the weight of it all, he found that the world began to lean in closer. People didn't want to see a perfect, unapproachable genius, they wanted to see the real person behind the technology, the person who, like everyone else, struggled, failed, and learned along the way. In the days that followed, the media buzzed with new angles. No longer was Elon the eccentric billionaire or the cold genius, he was becoming, simply, Elon. And that shift was more profound than he ever expected. It wasn't just the public perception that had changed. It was the way he viewed himself. As the world continued to watch, Elon made a conscious decision to embrace his imperfections, his struggles, and the humanity that defined him. And with that decision, he began to realize something crucial: this was the key to not only his personal growth but also to the growth of his ventures. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, new projects, and internal reflection. Musk met with his teams at Tesla and SpaceX, not with the usual laser focus on innovation, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He spoke more candidly with his employees, sharing his doubts and listening to their ideas. In the past, Elon had always been the one to give direction, to set the tone, to push for the next big breakthrough. Now, he was seeking input, encouraging collaboration in ways he had never done before. And it made a difference. At Tesla, the focus shifted to not only the development of new, groundbreaking vehicles but also to ensuring that the company's culture supported the very values he had come to embrace. There was a growing emphasis on work-life balance, mental health, and transparency within the company. The top-down mentality that had once dominated Tesla began to give way to something more inclusive and holistic. Musk encouraged his team to push boundaries, but he also told them to embrace vulnerability, to fail forward, and most importantly, to be real. SpaceX, too, saw a shift. The once rigid, mission-focused approach to exploring Mars and advancing space travel became infused with a sense of humanity. As Elon spoke with his team, he found himself articulating ideas not only about the future of human colonization but about the purpose of exploration itself. "We're not just reaching for the stars because we can," he said during a meeting. We're doing it because we have to. Because the future of humanity depends on us learning how to take care of our planet and each other. His words resonated deeply within the team. They were no longer simply striving to build rockets, they were driven by a greater sense of connection, of shared responsibility. The mission to Mars, once seen as an unattainable goal, now felt more like a collective effort, something that Musk and his entire team were working toward not just for the sake of exploration, but for the future of humankind. As Elon continued to reflect on his journey, he found that his personal evolution was, in fact, mirroring the evolution of his companies. Just as Tesla and SpaceX had begun to evolve in their approach to their missions, so had Elon. And that evolution wasn't just about making technological advances, it was about shaping a future that aligned with the very values he had struggled to accept about himself: imperfection, vulnerability, and connection. But even as Elon found peace in this shift, there were still challenges ahead. The world was waiting for the next big move, and Musk knew that the expectations placed upon him were immense. But instead of feeling burdened by that pressure, he now felt driven by it. Because he wasn't trying to live up to some unattainable standard anymore. He wasn't trying to be perfect. He was just trying to be his best self, and to show the world that that was enough. One evening, as Elon sat on his private balcony overlooking the sprawling Tesla campus, he reflected on how far he had come. The late nights, the sleepless moments, the crushing pressure, it had all led him to this. To this moment of clarity, where he understood the true essence of leadership, of innovation, and of human connection. The road ahead would be full of obstacles, as always. But this time, he was ready for them in a way he hadn't been before. He was no longer a man chained to the idea of perfection. He was a man on a mission. Not just to change the world, but to make it a better place for everyone. And that meant embracing the journey, with all of its bumps and twists, rather than trying to navigate around them. The next day, Elon held another meeting with his leadership teams. This time, he wasn't just discussing the technicalities of their latest projects, he was discussing purpose. We're not just here to create the next big thing, he told them. We're here to build a future that's sustainable. Not just for our planet, but for our families, for each other. We're here to make people believe in themselves. To show them that no dream is too big, and no person is too small. The room fell silent for a moment. No one had ever heard Elon speak like this before. But as the silence stretched on, the energy in the room shifted. People began to nod, quietly acknowledging what Musk had just shared. They weren't just working for a paycheck or for recognition. They were part of something bigger. They were a part of a movement, a legacy that would transcend any one individual or company. And that was the moment Elon Musk realized something he had never fully understood until then. The greatest breakthroughs didn't come from a place of isolation, perfection, or relentless pursuit of success. The greatest breakthroughs came from a place of humanity. They came from a place where people could stand together, embrace each other's flaws, and move forward with shared purpose. As the meeting wrapped up, Elon left the room feeling a profound sense of peace. This wasn't the end of his journey. It wasn't the culmination of his work. It was just another beginning, a beginning not defined by his genius, but by his willingness to be human. And with that realization, Elon knew one thing for certain: the best was yet to come. It had been a few months since Elon Musk had publicly embraced his vulnerability, but the world continued to react in ways that even he hadn't anticipated. For years, he had been the subject of media scrutiny, always on the edge of controversy or being hailed as the next big thing. But this new direction he had taken, one that embraced imperfection and openness, had sparked something entirely different. People were listening, and more importantly, they were connecting with him in ways he hadn't thought possible. The unexpected part was not just the reaction from the public, but from the business world. Rivals and allies alike had taken notice. Companies that had once viewed him as a competitor now saw him as someone whose ideas could spark revolutionary change. Investors who had once hesitated were now eager to come on board, seeing not just the opportunity for financial growth but a chance to be part of a larger story, one that didn't just focus on profit margins but on the collective good. Elon was sitting in his office at SpaceX when the call came. His assistant, as always, was the first to deliver the news, a mixture of excitement and uncertainty in her tone. "Elon, there's someone here to see you. They're from one of the largest venture capital firms in the world. They're interested in talking about a potential partnership." Elon's first instinct was skepticism. He had grown accustomed to the endless stream of meetings and proposals that often turned out to be nothing more than corporate noise. But something about the urgency in his assistant's voice caught his attention. Perhaps it was the way she had said, "largest," or maybe it was just his gut telling him to take this seriously. He nodded, signaling her to send them in. Moments later, two men in sharp suits entered his office. One was familiar, an investor he had crossed paths with on occasion, but the other was a stranger. The man was tall, with piercing blue eyes and a presence that immediately commanded attention. He extended his hand to Elon. "Mr. Musk," he said, "it's a pleasure to meet you." Elon studied him for a moment, then shook his hand. "Likewise. What brings you here today?" "We've been watching your work closely," the stranger said, his voice measured but with a hint of excitement. "Not just your companies, but the way you've been evolving. The way you've started showing a different side of yourself. And we think it's time to talk about the future. The future of human existence." Elon raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." The man, who introduced himself as Gregory Holt, sat down across from Elon, his posture relaxed but purposeful. "We're looking to partner with someone who isn't just interested in technology or innovation for the sake of profit. We need someone who can help us shape the future of the human race. We believe you're that person, Elon." Elon wasn't sure what to make of the statement, but something about Gregory's demeanor intrigued him. The man didn't seem to be interested in the usual corporate jargon or sales pitch. There was a genuine sense of conviction in his words, one that felt different from anything Elon had encountered in a long time. "What exactly are you proposing?" Elon asked, leaning forward slightly. Gregory smiled, leaning back in his chair as he began to outline the vision. "We've been working on a project that could change the course of human history. But we need your expertise, your vision. It's a long-term venture, something that requires patience, resources, and an unwavering belief in what's possible. We want to create a self-sustaining city on Mars, but not just any city. A city where people can truly thrive, where technology and humanity are seamlessly integrated. It's about building a new world, a place where people can live, work, and grow, independent of the Earth." Elon's mind raced as he processed the words. This was it. The grand vision he had long dreamed of, the very thing he had devoted so much of his life to, was now within reach. But there was a catch, as there always was. Gregory wasn't just offering him a partnership. He was offering him something far more profound, the opportunity to not only lead humanity to Mars but to create a model for what life could be like beyond Earth. The question, as it often did, was whether Elon was ready to take that leap. Could he leave behind the safety of Earth and begin this new, bold chapter? And even more importantly, could he continue to balance this vision with the very human needs he had only just begun to embrace? "I'm intrigued," Elon said, his voice steady. "But I need to understand more. What's the timeline? What kind of resources are we talking about?" Gregory outlined the basics of the project, funding, timeline, and the necessary technological advancements. But it was the larger picture, the potential impact on humanity, that truly captivated Elon's attention. This wasn't just about building a company or making history, it was about creating a new future, one where humans could survive and thrive beyond Earth. And that, more than anything, seemed to resonate with Elon. "I'll need to discuss this with my team," Elon said after a long pause. "But you've got my attention. Let's see where this goes." As Gregory and his colleague left, Elon sat back in his chair, his mind buzzing with possibilities. The weight of the decision was not lost on him. This wasn't just another business venture, this was a chance to redefine the future of humanity. But even as excitement began to build, a part of him wondered, was he truly ready for such a monumental step? Later that evening, as he walked through the halls of SpaceX, Elon found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He had always been driven by the idea of advancing technology, of pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But now, he realized, it wasn't just about that anymore. It was about creating a future for all of humanity, one that included not just progress, but people, their hopes, their dreams, their very essence. Elon stood on the rooftop of the SpaceX building, looking out at the vast expanse of the night sky. The stars seemed brighter than usual, almost within reach. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. Instead, he felt the pull of something bigger than himself. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about doing it alone. It was about embracing the unknown and working with others to create something extraordinary. He turned away from the edge, smiling to himself. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain: the future wasn't just about space. It was about creating a new world for humanity, and that journey had only just begun. Elon Musk had always been a man of action. From building rockets that could land themselves to creating electric cars that challenged traditional automotive norms, he was accustomed to facing impossible challenges and defying expectations. But the project Gregory Holt proposed was different. This was more than just another technological leap forward. This was the challenge of a lifetime, one that required not just innovation but an entirely new paradigm of thinking. The idea of creating a self-sustaining city on Mars was monumental. Elon had always been vocal about the need to make humanity a multiplanetary species, but to truly make this vision a reality, the stakes were far higher than anything he had attempted before. It wasn't just about sending rockets into space or building solar grids, it was about creating an environment where humans could live, breathe, and thrive for generations to come, far from the safety of Earth. Elon sat in the boardroom at SpaceX, surrounded by his trusted team of engineers and scientists. They had gathered to discuss the details of the Mars colony project, what it would take, both technically and philosophically, to make the city a reality. As he looked around the table, Elon felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "We're talking about more than just building a city," Elon began, his voice steady. "We're talking about creating a new world, a place where people can not only survive, but flourish. This means we'll need systems that support life, oxygen production, food sources, water purification, and most importantly, a sustainable energy model. All of this, plus the ability to protect human life from the harsh environment of Mars. It's a tall order, but it's what we're here for." One of the engineers, a young woman named Sophie, raised her hand. "Elon, how do we even begin to design a city that can meet all of these requirements? How do we ensure that it will not just survive, but truly thrive, especially given that we're not working with a controlled environment like we have on Earth?" Elon paused, taking a moment to reflect on her question. It was a good one. The answer was far from simple. We have to start with the basics: systems that are autonomous, adaptable, and sustainable. We need to think beyond just survival and towards long-term viability. It's not just about building buildings, it's about designing an ecosystem. A closed-loop system that can function independently. Imagine a system where every aspect of life, from growing food to generating power to recycling waste, works together, seamlessly, without relying on Earth. Sophie nodded. It's a delicate balance. The technology doesn't exist yet, and we can't afford mistakes. The room was silent for a moment as everyone absorbed the weight of what Elon had just said. The challenge ahead was unlike any other. But this was Elon Musk's world. There were no limits, only new frontiers to push. Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose. The weight he had once carried, the expectation to be perfect, to have all the answers, was now gone. He had accepted his flaws and embraced the unknown. And now, with this new perspective, he saw the Mars project not just as a technological challenge but as an opportunity to redefine humanity's place in the universe. A few weeks later, Elon found himself in a high-rise conference room in New York, sitting across from Gregory Holt. They had met to discuss funding and strategic partnerships for the Mars project, but Elon's mind was still focused on the deeper implications of the mission. He had been mulling over the idea that, for the first time in his life, he wasn't just building something for profit or for legacy. He was building for humanity. The sense of responsibility felt heavier now, but it also felt more rewarding. "We're on the verge of something monumental," Gregory said, breaking Elon's concentration. "You've got a chance to change the course of history, Elon. But I want to make sure you're ready for what that means. It's not just about rockets and cities on Mars. It's about convincing the world that this is a necessary step for human survival." Elon met his gaze. "I don't need convincing. I've seen the impact climate change is having on Earth, and I've watched as resources continue to dwindle. There will come a day when we will need to rely on other planets. But it's not just about escaping, it's about creating a backup, a safety net, for humanity. I want to give people hope, not just survival." Gregory was silent for a moment, then nodded. "And that's what makes you different, Elon. You're not doing this just for yourself. You're doing this for everyone." The word struck a chord with Elon. As much as he had pushed the boundaries of technology, he had always been driven by a desire to be at the forefront of human progress. But now, it wasn't just about pushing the boundaries. It was about ensuring that humanity could continue to progress, for the good of future generations. Gregory continued, "We need to make sure we have the right resources, the right backing, and the right partnerships in place. This won't be easy. You'll face pushback from people who don't understand or are too afraid of the scale of what you're trying to do. And even with the technology, there are many unknowns." "I'm used to pushback," Elon replied. "I've faced it my whole life. But now, I don't just want to win for the sake of winning. I want to win for humanity." The two men sat in silence, the weight of the conversation settling in. They weren't just discussing the future of SpaceX or Tesla, they were talking about the future of human existence. Elon knew the stakes had never been higher. The road ahead would be filled with obstacles, technical, financial, and ideological, but he was determined. The vision of a thriving, self-sustaining city on Mars wasn't just a dream anymore, it was something he could touch, something he could make real. But it would take everything he had, and more. As Elon left the meeting, a sense of clarity washed over him. He had spent years working to perfect his companies, but now he realized the work that mattered most was still ahead of him. The Mars project was not just a technological endeavor, it was a chance to truly redefine what humanity was capable of. And that, above all else, was worth the challenge. He stood on the balcony of his New York hotel room later that night, staring out at the glowing skyline. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like, what it would feel like, to stand on the surface of Mars, to look up at the stars and know that humanity had made its first steps towards becoming a multiplanetary species. The challenge was daunting, but for the first time in a long while, Elon felt ready for it. The next phase had begun. The momentum of Elon Musk's Mars project had been unstoppable for months, but as with all great endeavors, the road to success was never as smooth as one might hope. After the initial rush of excitement from investors and partners, the reality of scaling such a monumental task began to set in. What seemed like an unstoppable force of innovation and ambition soon ran into an unexpected wall of technical setbacks, financial challenges, and skepticism from those who had been the most vocal supporters. It started with the first major test launch of a prototype space habitat designed to simulate life on Mars. The engineers and scientists at SpaceX had poured every ounce of their expertise into this project, but the launch ended in failure. The habitat, which was supposed to remain stable and operational for several days, malfunctioned shortly after landing on the test field. Pressure systems were compromised, air filtration units failed, and within hours, the habitat was deemed uninhabitable. Elon was the first to visit the site, standing silently next to the engineers who were already at work assessing the damage. The air was thick with the smell of burning materials, and the sound of tools clanging echoed as they scrambled to salvage what they could. Elon's mind raced as he scanned the wreckage, but he did not let his frustration show. "We will fix this," he said, his voice calm but firm. A senior engineer, Paul, approached him, holding a tablet that displayed the analysis of the malfunction. "Elon, the issue isn't just the failure of the components. It's that some of the systems we were relying on didn't perform as expected under Martian-like conditions. The gravity, temperature fluctuation, and radiation are factors we still haven't fully accounted for." Elon nodded, his thoughts turning inward. This wasn't just a setback, it was a reminder that Mars was an unforgiving place, one that could not be tamed by human innovation alone. The technology they had built so far was revolutionary, but it wasn't ready for the real thing. Not yet. "We need to rethink our approach," Elon said, his voice resolute. "I'm not backing down from this. Let's go back to the drawing board. We'll redesign the habitat systems, but we'll also invest more time and resources into testing under harsher conditions." Paul gave a grim nod, but he could see the fire in Elon's eyes. There was no question, failure wasn't an option for Musk. He was driven by a deeper purpose now, and that purpose was bigger than any single failure. As weeks passed, the team worked tirelessly, re-evaluating every piece of the design, from the energy systems to the life support modules. But progress was slow, and as the financial demands of the project mounted, Elon found himself facing another battle, one that was far more bureaucratic than technical. Despite the promising talks with investors, there were murmurs of doubt. The sheer cost of the Mars project was astronomical, and investors began to question whether the potential rewards justified the risks. The economy had been fluctuating, and some of the venture capital firms that had initially jumped on board were now pulling back, hesitant to commit further funding to a project that seemed to have no end in sight. In one particularly tense meeting with Gregory Holt and several high-level investors, the atmosphere felt heavy. The room, usually filled with energy and excitement, now seemed subdued. Gregory looked at Elon, who sat across from him, arms crossed and face unreadable. "Elon," Gregory began, "you've got to understand. The scale of this project is unprecedented. We're talking about billions of dollars, years of work, and the chance of failure is not insignificant. The investors are starting to get nervous." Elon leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "We've been through worse. You've seen the failures, the setbacks, the way we've turned them around. I won't let this stop us. We're not just building a city on Mars, we're building the future. And no one can afford to ignore that. I know the stakes. I know the risks. But we have a choice: take the risk and change everything, or play it safe and watch humanity's potential slip away." There was a moment of silence as the room digested Elon's words. The weight of the decision lay heavily on everyone, but deep down, most of them knew he was right. There was no middle ground in this kind of work. Either they were all in, or they weren't. Gregory finally spoke. "I agree with you, Elon. But we need to prove this is viable. We need to show that the technology will work. That it's worth investing in. Without that proof, we're just chasing a dream." Elon nodded. "And we will. I'll make sure of it." But even as he reassured Gregory and the investors, doubt gnawed at him. There was no clear path forward, only the weight of an audacious dream and the overwhelming pressure to make it happen. The project had already consumed so much of his time, and he couldn't ignore the feeling that the clock was ticking. As much as he wanted to be optimistic, the reality of the situation couldn't be denied. He had made so many promises, to his team, to the world, to himself. For the first time in years, Elon felt the creeping anxiety of self-doubt. Was he truly prepared to carry this burden? Could he keep pushing forward when so much seemed to be working against him? One evening, he found himself at home, staring out at the night sky. His thoughts swirled around in his mind as he tried to make sense of it all. He had always been driven by a vision, a belief that he could change the world. But now, that vision felt almost too big, too impossible. Sitting down at his desk, he picked up his phone and called someone he hadn't spoken to in a while, his old friend and fellow innovator, Richard Branson. "Richard," Elon said when the call was answered. "I need advice. I'm at a crossroads with the Mars project. We've hit some major setbacks, and the investors are starting to pull back. I need to understand how you've managed to keep pushing forward, even when things seemed impossible." Richard's voice came through the phone with a knowing calm. "Elon, you've always been a risk-taker. That's what has made you who you are. The world doesn't reward people who play it safe. But you've got to be smart about it. Sometimes, the only way to get to the other side is to push through the hardest part. People will doubt you. They'll question your judgment. But if you believe in what you're doing, you've got to stay focused on that bigger vision. Keep your eyes on the future. That's the only thing that matters." Elon took a deep breath, Richard's words resonating with him more than he had expected. It wasn't about the setbacks, it was about the bigger picture. He had always known the road to Mars would be filled with obstacles, but it was his belief in the mission, in the future, that would drive him forward. "Thanks, Richard," Elon said, his voice steadier now. "You've given me the clarity I needed." As he hung up the phone, a sense of determination washed over him. There was no turning back now. The road ahead would be difficult, and the odds were stacked against him. But Elon Musk had never been one to back down from a challenge. The future of humanity was on the line, and he would not let it slip away. Elon Musk had always been driven by one singular belief: failure was not an option. Every challenge, every setback was merely an opportunity to learn, adapt, and push the boundaries of what was possible. But even his unshakable resolve was being tested. After months of technical hurdles, financial uncertainty, and public skepticism, Elon found himself standing at a pivotal moment. He knew the Mars project was on the verge of collapse. If they couldn't turn things around quickly, the dream of a self-sustaining colony on Mars might remain just that, a dream. But Elon had never been one to back down from adversity. As his team worked tirelessly to redesign the Mars habitat and improve the technology, he realized that the way forward wasn't just about the systems they were building, but also about the way they communicated the vision. The world needed to see that this was not just another science fiction fantasy. It was the next great leap for humanity. The stakes were too high to fail. In the weeks following his conversation with Richard Branson, Elon dove into the project with even more vigor. He spent countless hours working alongside his team, focusing not just on the technical details, but on the bigger picture. He made a decision: he would take the risk of pushing the technology further than it had ever gone before. There would be no more half measures. No more delays. The turning point came one early morning, as Elon walked into the SpaceX headquarters. The engineers had gathered in the war room, where monitors displayed simulations and graphs detailing their progress. Sophie, the lead engineer, was already there, staring intently at the screen. "Elon, we've done it," she said, barely able to contain her excitement. "The new prototype is working. It's stable. The habitat can withstand the extreme temperatures, radiation, and pressure conditions we modeled for Mars. It's the first time we've achieved this level of success." Elon's heart raced as he processed her words. This was it. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. "Show me," Elon said, his voice sharp with anticipation. Sophie pulled up the simulation on the screen. The new habitat was designed with advanced shielding, a modular life support system, and a self-sustaining energy grid. It was a concept that Elon had envisioned for years, but now, it was finally real. The technology was working. For the first time, they had a viable solution for creating a livable space on Mars. "Do we have enough data to move forward?" Elon asked, his mind already racing with the next steps. Sophie nodded. "We still need to run more tests, but we're confident we can move on to the next phase. The habitat is capable of supporting life for an extended period. It's a huge step forward." Elon exhaled, a sense of relief washing over him. The weight that had been bearing down on him for months, of doubt, uncertainty, and failure, was lifted, if only for a moment. This was what he had been working toward, a tangible proof that humanity could take the first steps toward becoming a multiplanetary species. But even as he felt the thrill of success, he knew the work wasn't over. This was just one piece of the puzzle. The next step was taking that technology, scaling it, and building an entire ecosystem that could sustain life on Mars. There was still so much to do. Elon spent the next few weeks traveling around the country, meeting with potential partners, government officials, and investors to secure the necessary backing for the next phase of the Mars project. The breakthrough with the habitat had given him new momentum, and he was determined to turn this into a reality. At one particularly tense meeting with a group of high-profile investors, Elon presented the new technology with a level of confidence that had been absent just a few months earlier. He had once again transformed failure into opportunity, and now, with the technology in hand, he was ready to secure the future of the project. "We've tested the systems," Elon explained. "They work. The next step is scaling up. We'll need more funding, more resources, and a larger team. But this is the moment we've all been waiting for. The technology exists. The infrastructure is possible. All we need is the commitment to make it happen." There was a long pause in the room as the investors deliberated. Elon had been through these kinds of meetings before, and he knew the stakes were higher than ever. But this time, there was a sense of belief in the air. The Mars project wasn't just a gamble anymore, it was a legitimate opportunity for the future. Finally, one of the investors spoke up. "We believe in this. We believe in you, Elon. You've delivered before, and we're willing to put our trust in you again." Elon felt the weight of their words. This was more than just money. This was a commitment to a vision that would change the course of human history. And with this renewed support, the Mars project was no longer a distant dream. It was something they could build together. With the funding secured and the technology proven, Elon turned his attention to the next challenge, building the infrastructure that would support the first wave of colonists on Mars. The timeline was aggressive. The pressure was immense. But now, Elon's belief in the mission was stronger than ever. He gathered his team once again, this time in a large, open space at SpaceX's headquarters. The room was filled with engineers, scientists, and architects, all eager to take on the next phase of the project. Elon stood at the front, his gaze steady as he addressed the team. "We're about to make history," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "We're not just building a city on Mars, we're building the future of humanity. This is what we were meant to do. The technology is here. The resources are in place. And now, it's up to us to make this vision a reality. Let's build something that will change everything." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time in months, there was a sense of unity, of purpose. Elon knew the road ahead would be difficult, but this time, he wasn't alone. He had a team, a vision, and the belief that, together, they could accomplish the impossible. As Elon left the meeting, he stepped out into the cool evening air. The weight of the world no longer felt so heavy. For the first time, he could see a path forward, one that was filled with hope, possibility, and the promise of a new beginning. The road to Mars was still long, and the challenges were far from over. But now, more than ever, Elon Musk was convinced that the future was within reach. It wasn't just about reaching Mars, it was about humanity's survival, about giving the next generation a chance to thrive, not just on Earth, but among the stars. And as he looked up at the night sky, he knew that this was just the beginning. It had taken years of perseverance, setbacks, and sacrifice, but now, Elon Musk stood at the precipice of a moment that would define his legacy. The Mars project was no longer a distant hope or an ambitious pipe dream, it had become a reality. The first successful colonization mission was scheduled to depart for Mars in just a few short months, and the world was watching. The final pieces were falling into place, and despite the many obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable, everything was lining up for the mission to succeed. The day before the launch, Elon stood in front of the team he had built, a team of engineers, astronauts, and dreamers who had put everything on the line to get to this point. The air inside SpaceX's headquarters was charged with excitement, but it was also filled with a quiet understanding of the weight of what was about to happen. The world was looking to them not just for a scientific breakthrough, but for hope that humanity could overcome its flaws and reach for the stars. Elon addressed the room, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We're about to do something no one thought was possible. Not just in the world of technology, but for humanity as a whole. Tomorrow, we send people to Mars. And not just as visitors. This is the beginning of life on a new world. It's our next great step as a species." His words carried the weight of history. This wasn't just about sending a rocket into space, it was about creating a future that would extend far beyond Earth's borders. Elon had always known that the only way to truly push the boundaries of human potential was to look beyond the planet that had birthed civilization. He had faced enormous challenges, and there were still so many unknowns. But now, as he looked at the faces of the people around him, he knew that this was only the beginning. "We've overcome the impossible," he continued. "We've made this possible. Together." The room erupted into applause, but it was clear that the applause wasn't just for the success they had achieved, it was for the shared belief in something greater. Something that would change everything. The following morning, as the sun began to rise, the world gathered to witness history. SpaceX's Mars mission was a global event, and millions tuned in to watch as the countdown began. The launch pad was a sea of activity as technicians made their final checks, ensuring every system was go for launch. The world had never been more united in their anticipation of what was about to unfold. Elon stood in the control room, surrounded by his closest team members. His heart raced as the countdown clock ticked down. There was an unmistakable sense of tension in the air, every second counted, every decision mattered. But for Elon, this moment felt surreal. After all the years of struggle, after every setback, every moment of doubt, this was the culmination of his vision. 10, 9, 8. The voices of the mission controllers echoed through the room, and Elon could feel the collective breath of the entire world held in anticipation. 7, 6, 5. The final moments before liftoff felt like an eternity. His mind flashed through all the sleepless nights, the endless design revisions, the battles with investors, the technical failures. And yet, standing there, knowing that all of this had led to this singular moment, Elon knew that it had been worth it. 4, 3, 2. The world held its breath. 1. Ignition, liftoff. The rocket engines roared to life, and the rocket, an enormous, gleaming spaceship, soared into the sky. It was a magnificent sight, a symbol of human ingenuity, determination, and hope. As the rocket ascended into the atmosphere, Elon allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The next few hours were a blur. The launch had gone flawlessly, and now the team was watching intently as the spacecraft continued its journey toward Mars. Elon remained in constant communication with the Mission Control Center, ensuring everything was proceeding smoothly. His mind raced with questions about the future. What would the first settlers on Mars face? What challenges awaited them? And most importantly, what would the success of this mission mean for the future of humanity? But it wasn't just about the mission. It was about the new chapter humanity was beginning to write, a chapter that would forever change the course of history. This mission wasn't just a technological achievement, it was a declaration. A declaration that humanity's future was no longer confined to the Earth. The stars were within reach. Weeks later, as the first group of astronauts touched down on the Martian surface, the world watched in awe. The moment the rocket's hatch opened and the first astronaut set foot on Mars, it was as if the impossible had become possible. There was no fanfare, no dramatic music. Just the quiet hum of the Martian winds as the first human footprints were left on an alien world. The astronauts planted a flag, a symbol of human perseverance, of hope, and of the unyielding spirit to explore. And as they looked up at the barren red landscape, there was a shared understanding that they weren't just standing on a new world. They were standing at the threshold of the future. The news broadcasted the historic achievement around the globe, and people everywhere felt a collective sense of pride. What Elon Musk and his team had accomplished was no longer just the stuff of science fiction. It was real. They had opened the door to a new frontier for humanity. Months passed as the Mars colonization team began to establish their first permanent base on the planet. Elon remained deeply involved in the project, overseeing the growth of the base and the expansion of the necessary infrastructure. It wasn't easy, but every step forward felt like a victory for the team, for SpaceX, and most importantly, for humanity's future. One evening, as Elon sat in his office, looking out over the bustling SpaceX headquarters, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought back to those early days, when no one believed this could be possible. When he had faced constant setbacks, financial pressures, and doubts from every direction. Yet, here they were, on Mars. The phone rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Sophie, the lead engineer. "Elon," she said, her voice filled with excitement, "we've done it. The base is fully operational. We've got sustainable energy, a water system that works, and the habitat modules are holding up perfectly. We're ready for the next phase." Elon smiled, the weight of the years of effort finally lifting. "That's amazing, Sophie. We did it. We really did it." He paused, looking out over the headquarters once more, the sounds of engineers and scientists working in the background. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "There's still so much to do. But for the first time, I truly believe that we are ready to build a future beyond Earth." As the first Martian colony began to grow, Elon Musk stood as a symbol of human ambition, ingenuity, and the unyielding belief that the impossible could be achieved. The Mars project was no longer a dream. It was a thriving reality, a new beginning for humanity. The road ahead would still be filled with challenges. But Elon knew one thing for certain: they had taken the first step. And in that step, they had changed everything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's the most impossible goal you've set for yourself, and how are you working to achieve it?